What happens when the rules are written to protect the bully? In the quiet, sun-drenched town of Brookvale, where tree-lined sidewalks whisper comfort, and the American flag flutters proudly outside the high school every morning, power doesn't wear a uniform. It wears a last name. And in this town, that name is Langston. Brookvale High looks like any other suburban school. Brick walls, a football field that glows under Friday night lights, lockers that slam with teenage rhythm. But beneath the surface of this picture-perfect place lies an unspoken truth. Some students walk these halls with privilege stitched into their shadows, while others learn to shrink themselves just to stay invisible. Caleb Morgan, a 17-year-old black teenager with quiet eyes and calloused hands, knew how to play the game. Keep your head down, don't speak unless spoken to, and above all, avoid Garrett Langston, the untouchable, unchecked son of the town's police chief. At Brookvale High, Garrett didn't need to threaten anyone. His last name did it for him. Caleb didn't want trouble. He spent his days drifting through classes and his evenings helping his mom, who worked 2 jobs, and training in the garage with his grandfather, Walter Morgan, a retired boxer with hands like stone and a voice like thunder in the storm. Walter taught Caleb how to move, how to strike, how to wait. Fists are just tools, he'd say. The real power is knowing when not to use them. But trouble wasn't something Caleb went looking for. It came for him. Or more accurately, it came for his little sister Lila, 12, smart, full of spark, still too young to understand the danger of standing out, and that made her a perfect target. It started, like it always does, in whispers and stares, a shove in the hallway, a stolen lunch, a slur muttered under breath. Garrett found a new way to entertain himself, humiliating Leela, and Caleb, desperate to protect her, did what he'd been taught. Stay calm, stay quiet. He thought it would fade. He thought silence was strength. Until one afternoon, Caleb turned the corner near the gas station and found Lila pinned against a wall by Garrett, her backpack clutched in his fist like a trophy. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She stared him down with the stubborn fire of someone raised to be brave. But Caleb saw the fear under her defiance. He felt it in his bones. And just like that, the game changed. He stepped in. Not with fists, not yet, with presence, with warning, with restraint. But Garrett, smirking, arrogant, only saw a challenge. He dared Caleb to hit him, provoked him, wanted him to make the first move, so the system could crush him with ease. Caleb didn't swing, not that day. He walked away with his sister's hand in his heart pounding with the ache of everything he didn't do. But that ache didn't fade. It grew. It pulsed. It dug into his chest like something alive, because Garrett had made one fatal mistake. He thought Caleb was afraid. What he didn't know was that Caleb wasn't backing down. He was building up. He trained. He waited. He remembered every lesson his grandfather gave him, and when Garrett crossed the line again, this time knocking Lila to the pavement, Caleb didn't hold back. He didn't rage. He didn't explode. He responded. Sharp, clean, controlled, the way you do when you know exactly what you're doing. But Brookvale didn't cheer for him. The school didn't protect him. Instead, Caleb was suspended while Garrett walked away, because in Brookvale, justice wasn't about what happened. It was about who it happened to. But Caleb didn't let them write the ending. He gathered voices. He found others who had suffered in silence. He brought the truth into the light with proof and purpose. And when the day came to speak in front of the school board, Caleb stood, not alone, not angry, because sometimes the real fight isn't with fists, it's with silence, with fear, with the stories they try to erase. Then this time, they weren't getting away with it. Now, before we dive into the full story, this real, raw, and deeply emotional account, I ask you to take a breath. Find a quiet space. Pour yourself a glass of water. Settle in. What you're about to witness isn't just a story of bullying. It's about power, justice, and a boy who chose not to be silent anymore. The morning sun filtered through the faded blinds of the Morgan household, casting slender streaks of golden light across the kitchen floor like bars in a cell. It was a Monday, like any other, but for Caleb Morgan, 17 and tired beyond his years, there was nothing ordinary about the day ahead. The air felt thicker, the silence heavier. Even the walls of his modest home, once a sanctuary, now seemed to lean in around him as if bracing for something none of them wanted to name. He sat at the small kitchen table, its surface scratched and worn from years of meals, homework, and silent conversations. Across from him, Lila dangled her legs from the too-tall wooden chair, trying to pretend she wasn't watching her big brother out of the corner of her eye. She stirred her oatmeal with more force than necessary, the metal spoon clinking rhythmically against the ceramic bowl. But Caleb didn't flinch. His hands were wrapped around a chipped mug of lukewarm coffee, and his eyes were lost in the steam rising from it, like smoke from a slow-burning fire. Walter Morgan stood at the counter, pouring himself a black cup from the ancient coffee pot that coughed and sputtered every morning like it might give out at any second. His hands, those storied fists wrapped in decades of scar tissue and glory, were gentle now as he passed a slice of toast to Lila. She mumbled a thank you, but her eyes stayed on Caleb. "You sleep at all?" Walter asked, without looking up. Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. His silence, tight and stretched thin, spoke for him. Walter nodded once, then sipped from his cup. "Thought so." Lila finally found her voice, soft and too careful for a 12-year-old. "Huh. Are you going to walk me to school today?" Caleb looked up, meeting her gaze. There was fear there, not panic. Lila was too proud for that, but something else, something sharper. A quiet dread that lodged itself in the shoulders, in the spine, in the instinct to check every shadow twice before stepping through it. "Of course," he said. "Always." She nodded but didn't smile. The streets of Brookvale were washed in soft light as they left the house. Autumn had begun its slow crawl into the town, and the leaves were starting to turn in waves of copper and crimson. The chill in the air wasn't enough to bite, just enough to whisper. As they walked, Caleb kept his eyes scanning every corner, every movement. Not out of paranoia, out of training. Walter had taught him that the first threat is the one you don't see coming, and in Brookvale, threats came with friendly smiles and polished badges. Lila didn't say much. She clutched her backpack like it was armor, and her sneakers scuffed against the sidewalk with soft defiance. Caleb watched the way her shoulders stiffened when they passed Garrett Langston's street, even though he wasn't there. She didn't look at the house, but Caleb did, and he saw the black SUV parked out front, shiny and monstrous. A police cruiser, Garrett's father's car. That damn SUV was a symbol, a reminder, not just of power, but of protection, and not for people like them. Brookvale High loomed ahead, its brick facade glowing in the morning sun like something noble and ancient. But Caleb saw through it. He always had. To him, the school was a stage, one where roles were assigned before you ever stepped foot inside. Some kids were given scripts, filled with praise and opportunity. Others, like him, got silence, a role with no lines. Inside, The building pulsed with adolescent noise. Lockers slammed, bells rang. Conversations bounced off linoleum floors and tile ceilings like static. Caleb kept his arm lightly on Lila's shoulder as they pushed through the crowd. He felt the eyes on them. Always the eyes. Watching. Garrett wasn't in sight, but Caleb knew better than to trust absence. The absence of a predator only meant one of two things. It was already watching, or it was about to strike. Lila peeled off toward her first class. Caleb stood at her door, watched her disappear into the classroom. She turned back once, just before the door closed, and gave him a tiny nod. He nodded back. The moment the door latched, Caleb exhaled, slow and deliberate, then turned. And there he was. Garrett Langston, 17, tall, white, clean-cut and draped in the ease of someone who had never known consequence. He leaned against a row of lockers with that same insufferable smirk that Caleb had come to recognize like a brand, flanked by his usual shadows. Derek and Miles, both bigger in size but smaller in spine. They flinched when Garrett did. They laughed when Garrett laughed. They fed off the power he exuded and helped him wield it like a club. Caleb didn't stop walking. He kept his chin level, his stride steady. His heart did not race, his stomach did not twist, but everything in him was bracing. Not for a fight. He didn't fear that. He feared the choice. Garrett stepped in front of him. "Morning, Morgan," he drawled. "A big day ahead?" Caleb stopped, met his eyes, said nothing. Garrett chuckled, low and mocking. "Heard you've been spending a lot of time in the gym lately. Getting ready for something?" Behind him, Derek snickered. Miles elbowed him. The usual script. Caleb didn't answer. He waited. Garrett continued, circling slightly. "You gotta admit, it's kinda pathetic. All that muscle, all that anger, but no one actually scared of you." Caleb's jaw flexed. "You know," Barrett said, lowering his voice, "Lila's a tough little thing, spunky, but maybe next time she needs a little more encouragement." And just like that, the line was crossed. Caleb stepped in, close. Not aggressively, not yet, but his eyes turned to steel. "You touch her again," he said, voice low and even. "And I'll make sure you understand what real fear feels like." Garrett's smile faltered for a split second. Then it returned, but colder. "You threatening me, Morgan?" "No," Caleb said. "I'm warning you." Silence stretched between them. Electric. Then Garrett stepped back, palms raised in mock surrender. "Whatever, man. Just having some fun." Caleb walked past him without another word, but he knew it was far from over. The look in Garrett's eyes wasn't finished. It was curious, calculating, and worse. It was excited. By the time Caleb made it to his first class, he was no longer thinking about books or quizzes or lunch. He was thinking about lines, the invisible ones, the ones that divide safety from danger, power from vulnerability, silence from survival. And for the first time, he realized something chilling. He wasn't standing on the line anymore. He was already across it. And Garrett Langston was still watching. The sky was beginning to bruise purple as the sun dropped behind the pine trees that framed the west edge of Brookvale. The hallway lights at the high school flickered once, just long enough to feel like an omen. Caleb Morgan stood in the corner near the band room, watching the last students filter out of the building. His muscles were tight from the constant hum of awareness, like a lion waiting for the first crack of a twig. He hadn't seen Garrett Langston since their hallway exchange earlier that morning. Not in the lunchroom, not in gym class, not even his car outside. That absence wasn't peace. It was pressure. The kind that builds inside the walls before the foundation starts to split. Lila had texted an hour ago. She stayed late for art club. Caleb had promised to pick her up. He made his way toward the back exit, eyes sweeping the lockers, the corners, the cracked tile, like a soldier tracing familiar terrain. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong in after-school quiet. A laugh. Not the kind born from joy, but the sharp-edged kind that cuts. Caleb froze. He knew that laugh. Everyone in Brookvale High knew that laugh. He broke into a run, the echo of his shoes pounding the hallway like a warning bell. Outside, the sun was bleeding into the asphalt of the back parking lot, and under the dimming sky, a scene unfolded that stole the breath from his chest. Lila was on the ground, her sketchbook pages scattered across the pavement like broken wings. Her backpack lay open beside her, its contents dumped in a careless spill of notebooks, pencil cases, and crushed snacks. Garrett Langston stood over her, fists clenched, lips curled. Derek and Miles flanked him, their postures rigid, with a nervous energy that always followed Garrett's storms. Caleb didn't hesitate. He dropped his own bag to the ground with a heavy thud, a sound that seemed to silence the wind, and crossed the parking lot in a straight line. Each step was deliberate, not rushed, not reckless, purposeful. He reached Lila first. She looked up at him, her lip trembling, knees scraped raw, hands still clutching a single torn page from her sketchbook. Her drawing had a smear of dirt across the middle, and the expression in her eyes was not fear. It was something deeper. Shame. Shame that she'd been seen like this. Shame that she couldn't fight back. "I got you," Caleb whispered. He helped her to her feet, brushed gravel from her jeans, then turned. Garrett stepped forward with the smugness of a boy who thought the world belonged to him. "Look who finally showed up," he sneered. "Big brother to the rescue. Again." "You crossed the line," Caleb said quietly. I laughed. "What line? The one where you pretend to matter in this school? The one where you think anyone's going to believe you over me?" Caleb didn't respond. His stance shifted. Weight balanced, jaw locked. Garrett caught the movement. "What?" Geard smirked. "You gonna hit me now, Morgan? Go ahead. I'm begging you." And in that moment, Caleb could hear his grandfather's voice clear as thunder in his memory. "Don't swing at a rage, swing at a truth." Garrett's arm moved first, sloppy, predictable. Caleb sidestepped cleanly, pivoted, and delivered a single jab, not to the face, not to knock him out, but to the ribs, just enough to fold him inward. Garrett gasped, staggered. The parking lot went still. Miles took an unconscious step back. Garrett recovered and charged again. But Caleb was faster, surer. This time, he ducked the punch, stepped inside the arc of Garrett's swing, and planted his forearm across Garrett's chest, stopping him mid-mate, and with a controlled shove, sent him stumbling into the gravel. A moment of absolute silence. Then Garrett pushed himself up, panting. His hands trembled, not with pain, but humiliation. His voice cracked. "You're dead, Morgan." Caleb stood still, calm, a wall against fire. "No," he said, "I'm done being quiet." Any strong action followed, symbolic and final. He bent down, picked up Lila's sketchbook, and tore out the ruined page. Then, slowly, he placed it back in her hands. The gesture wasn't dramatic, but it was intimate, defiant, a promise that nothing Garrett destroyed would stay broken. At night, at the dinner table, silence stretched long between the clatter of forks. Their mother wasn't home yet. Lila sat quietly, a bandage on her knee, sketching again. Walter broke the quiet. "You hit him?" Caleb nodded. "Good." The old man took a slow bite of cornbread, Now, what comes next? Caleb looked down at his plate. His fingers still ached from the impact. Going to come for me, Caleb said. He's not done. Walter leaned forward, eyes hard but proud. Then make damn sure when he does, it's you he fears, not just your fists. Lila spoke up, her voice barely above a whisper. He took my voice, Caleb. Today you gave it back. Caleb looked at her, saw strength building again behind her eyes, and something shifted. He wasn't just protecting her anymore. He was standing for every kid who had been cornered in silence. Every hallway ambush, every whispered slur, every name they'd tried to erase with fear. The storm had started, and Caleb also wasn't running from it. He was walking right into the center. The next morning, Brookvale felt different. Not on the surface. Cars still passed quietly down tree-lined streets. The bell at the high school still rang with its usual hollow clang, and students still moved through the halls with their faces buried in their phones. But for Caleb Morgan, the air felt denser, tighter, like every breath had to push through something invisible, yet immovable. He wasn't surprised when the loudspeaker crackled mid-second period. Caleb Morgan, report to the principal's office, immediately. The words echoed down the hallway like the sound of a door closing behind him. His classmates turned to look at him, some curious, some knowing, a few with the faintest trace of something like respect, but none of them said a word. That was the Brookvale way, silence, where there should be support. Caleb stood slowly, pushed in his chair with deliberate calm, and walked out without meeting anyone's eyes. As he stepped into the front office, he saw Principal Reynolds behind his desk, lips pressed into a tight line. But Caleb's eyes didn't stop there. In the corner of the room, leaning against the wall like he owned the building, was Chief Langston. Garrett's father. He was tall, broad, his arms crossed over a bulletproof vest that somehow seemed more metaphorical than literal. His badge gleamed like a threat beneath the fluorescent lights. Caleb, Principal Reynolds said, motioning him to sit. I'd rather stand, Caleb replied. Langston let out a low chuckle, a sound that rumbled deep like distant thunder. Tough guy, huh? Caleb kept his jaw tight. Why am I here? Reynolds hesitated, then glanced at Langston. The chief took over, stepping forward. My son came home yesterday bruised up, lip bleeding. Said you jumped him. Caleb blinked slowly. He threw the first punch. I was protecting my sister. Langston scoffed. That's not what Garrett said, and let me remind you, in this town, what Garrett says matters. There it was, the unspoken truth made plain. Principal Reynolds cleared his throat. Regardless of who started it, violence cannot be tolerated on school grounds. We're suspending you, Caleb. Indefinitely. It wasn't a surprise, but it still hit. Like a weight pressing into his chest, not because he hadn't expected it, but because he had. Because it proved what he already knew. This wasn't about justice. It was about control. He clenched his fists at his side, his knuckles going white. What about Garrett? We'll handle that internally, Reynolds muttered, not meeting Caleb's eyes. Which meant nothing. Which meant Garrett would walk free. Again. Chief Langston stepped in closer. His voice dropped to a whisper only Caleb could hear. You can throw a punch, boy. But that's not how you win. You don't win here. Understand? Caleb looked up slowly, his voice steady. Maybe not today, but I'm not done. Langston's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. That night, Caleb sat on the porch of his house, arms resting on his knees, watching dusk swallow the streetlight one shadow at a time. The cold settled in, but he didn't move. Not until Walter stepped outside, holding 2 mugs of cocoa. Caleb's favorite since he was a kid. He handed one over without a word and sat down beside his grandson. "They kicked me out," Caleb said, after a while. Walter nodded. Caleb stared into the mug. Garrett still walking the halls. Walter didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You thought the system would protect you?" "No," Caleb admitted, "but it's different when they say it to your face." Walter sipped slowly, his voice thick. "You got 2 choices now, son. Let him silence you, or get louder." A long silence passed between them. Then Caleb stood, walked into the house, and returned with a shoebox full of notebooks, old flyers, photos. Memories of things no one wanted to remember. He placed it on the porch between them, looked Walter in the eye. "I'm not fighting alone this time." And then, like some ritual long overdue, he opened the box and pulled out a faded yearbook page, a name circled in red ink. Eric Jennings, the first kid Garrett ever broke. The next day, Caleb called him. "Eric, it's Caleb. I need your help." There was a pause, a breath. "With Garrett?" Eric asked. Another breath. Silence. Amen. And so it began. Over the next 48 hours, Caleb made phone calls, knocked on doors, sent messages into the digital dark, asking the same question. Did Garrett ever hurt you? He didn't ask if they remembered, because of course they remembered. One by one, the answers came back. Yeah, yes. It wasn't just Garrett's fists, it was his words, his threats, his power. It was the silence that wrapped itself around every punch he threw and buried it beneath layers of fear. Soon, Caleb had names, stories, screenshots, video. He met them behind the old rec center, a forgotten building at the edge of town. Peeling paint, broken lights. But that night, it felt like a revolution waiting to be lit. They sat in a loose circle. Eric, Jordan Lopez, Maya Green, Charlie Sims. All of them wore the same look, tired, but no longer afraid. Caleb stood in the center, holding a folder, thick with pages. "We all know what's been happening," he said. "Garrett's been allowed to run this school like it's his, because his dad protects him, because nobody's been able to stop him." He took a breath. "But what if we stop being nobodies?" Maya raised an eyebrow. "How?" "We go public, all of us. Stories, evidence, video. We don't just tell the school, we tell the whole town." Jordan folded his arms. "And what happens when Garrett finds out?" Caleb's answer was quiet but sharp. "Then he'll know we're not scared of him anymore." A moment of silence. Then Eric stood. "I say we burn the silence to the ground." No, that night, they didn't sleep. They planned. They gathered. They became louder. During the meeting, Caleb takes out his phone, places it in the center of the circle, and plays the audio clip recorded the day Garrett hit him. The group sits in silence, hearing Garrett's voice sneer. "Come on, Morgan. Do something." Then the sound of the shove. Then Caleb's voice. "Let her go." When it ends, Maya whispers, "No more shadows. Let them see everything." "Walter, you thought you could fight this with just your fists, but fists fade. What stays is truth, and truth, boy, it doesn't bruise, it burns." The morning before the town hall meeting dawned heavy with cloud. Not the kind that brought rain, but the kind that stretched low and unmoving, thick with tension, like the sky itself was holding its breath. Inside Brookvale High, something unspoken had begun to shift. Whispers traveled faster than announcements, faster than rumors. They moved like electricity in water, sharp, unseen, impossible to stop. Caleb Morgan's name was on every lip, tucked behind nervous laughs or muttered in admiration. He had become a symbol, not of violence, but of interruption. He had broken the rhythm, disrupted the silence, and now the whole school buzzed with the unease of awakening. Caleb wasn't allowed inside anymore, but he didn't need to be, because his story had ended before him. In first period, a folded flyer passed from desk to desk. Do you know what Garrett Langston has done? By second period, a student had posted a grainy screenshot of the confrontation video online. By third, the comments began, "Finally, I thought I was the only one." Did that to me too. Behind the rec center that afternoon, the group grew. Not 4 kids anymore, not 6, 17. 17 stories, 17 truths, 17 voices. Caleb stood among them, no longer needing to be loud. He listened, eyes steady, shoulders squared. His fists didn't clench anymore, because now he wasn't bracing for a punch. He was preparing for a storm. They made a plan. That night, they would show the town who Garrett really was. At the school board meeting, under the fluorescent lights and behind the polished podiums, they would stand. Not as victims, not as enemies. Caleb stood outside the meeting room an hour early. The building hummed with fluorescent lighting and nervous tension. Teachers walked briskly through the halls. Parents whispered in corners. Garrett was already inside, seated beside his father like a prince at trial. Walter walked up beside Caleb, adjusting the sleeves of his old bomber jacket. "You ready?" he asked. Caleb looked at the door, then back at his grandfather. "I'm not sure if this is bravery or madness." Walter smiled, soft and slow. "Boy, most bravery starts out sounding like madness." He placed a hand on Caleb's back. "Now go change the air in that room." Caleb entered first. The room fell silent. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone pulled every gaze like gravity. Behind him, one by one, the others followed. Eric, Maya, Jordan, Charlie, and more. Filling the space like rising water. Chief Langston's expression twisted just enough to betray a sliver of doubt. Principal Reynolds cleared his throat at the front. "Tonight, we are gathered to address matters of student safety." Eric interrupted, stepping forward. "We're not here to be addressed. We're here to be heard." A wave of murmurs rippled through the room. Maya stepped up beside him. "I was pushed down a stairwell last year. No one investigated. Talia. He broke my locker, left a note, called it a joke. Jordan, he shattered my phone because I wouldn't give him my answers on a test. One by one, they spoke. One by one, they stepped out of the silence. Caleb waited until the room had grown quiet again. Then he stepped to the center. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He took out his phone. Played the audio. Garrett's voice sneered from the speaker. "Come on, Morgan, do something." Then the sound. A push. A sharp inhale. Abe's voice, steady. "Let her go." Then the sound of the it. Caleb lifted his eyes to the crowd. "I didn't want to fight," he said. "I just wanted my sister to be safe." He turned to face the school board. And when no one listened, I became louder. The room was still. Chief Langston stood. His voice roared. "This is a circus. These are kids with grudges. This proves nothing." But his voice was losing its grip. For the first time, the authority in it cracked. The teacher said, "I've seen Garrett intimidate students." Another voice. A parent. "My son was afraid to come to school." The tide turned. Visibly, irreversibly. Principal Reynolds tapped his pen twice. "We'll deliberate, but one thing's clear. This is no longer an internal matter. Walter still in the back of the room nodded once. Not to Caleb, not to the board, but to something in the air, like he knew the moment the system blinked. Outside the meeting room, after the board dismissed everyone, Caleb stood in the fading light, his heart thudding in his chest. Maya walked up beside him, arms crossed. "Dead," she said. He shook his head slowly. "No, we did." She bumped her shoulder into his. "Well, you lit the match. And behind them, inside those walls, something finally began to burn. Then, when Caleb enters the meeting room, he places a single folded sketch from Leela, one that had been torn, then taped back together, on the podium before he speaks. A drawing of a small girl standing alone in a hallway of shadows, with a line of light breaking through behind her. No one speaks, but everyone sees. Chillum, to the board. You see a fight, we see survival. You see fists, we see silence breaking. This isn't about punishment anymore. It's about truth. And truth doesn't whisper. It roars. The next morning, Brookvale High did not wake up the same. It didn't whisper. It roared. From the moment the first bell rang, something felt fractured, and not the kind that breaks and disappears, the kind that breaks and reveals. Word of the school board meeting had spread like wildfire, faster than gossip, faster than fear. And for the first time in a long time, students walked the halls not with their heads down, but with their eyes up, searching, watching, awakening. Garrett Langston didn't show up that day. His absence wasn't relief. It was confirmation. Something had shifted, and everyone felt it, even those who pretended not to. In the cafeteria, students huddled around phones watching the video Caleb had played the night before, again and again. Every line, every sound, every moment of truth captured in pixels and sound bites that no longer belonged to whispers in the dark. It was out now, and it wasn't going back in. But truth, like a fire, doesn't spread cleanly. It scorches. It consumes. By lunchtime, retaliation came, not from Garrett, from a system that had always protected him. Caleb, still suspended, got the call while he sat on the steps of his grandfather's garage, repairing the worn hand wraps he used to train. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He answered, "Is this Khalid Morgan?" "This is Officer Keller with the Brookville Police Department. We'd like you to come down to the station. There's been a formal complaint filed against you." He didn't flinch. "Assault, intimidation, threats. We'll need a statement today." Caleb hung up, quietly. He stared at the phone in his hand for a long second. Then he rose, slowly, and walked back inside the house. Walter was at the kitchen table. He didn't need to ask. One look at Caleb told him everything. "They case for you," he said. "They think I'll back down." Walter stood, walked to the cabinet, and pulled out a small, folded American flag in a triangular wooden case. He placed it on the table. "You know who that belonged to?" he asked. Caleb nodded. "Your brother." "Sure." "He died in a war overseas," Walter said. "But he fought two here. One with a uniform, one without." He stepped closer, voice quiet but solid. "You're in the second one now." Caleb nodded once, then turned to leave. Walter's voice followed him. "Don't forget, boy, real power ain't how hard you hit. It's how long you stand after you've been hit." That evening, the town of Brookville witnessed something it had never seen. The protest. Not hundreds, not even dozens. Just enough Caleb stood at the front steps of Brook Bowl High, facing the building that had tried to bury him. Behind him stood Eric, Maya, Jordan, Charlie, Lila, and 11 others. Each one carried a printed photo of their own face, with a short sentence underneath. And the trap humiliated me. They did nothing. The school doors were locked, the faculty silent behind windows, but the students outside were not. With each chant, the silence cracked. With each face lifted toward the sun, the shame turned outward. A news van arrived by late afternoon. A reporter stepped out, notebook in hand, eyes wide as she scanned the faces, the signs, the truth written plainly in permanent marker and held in teenage hands. "We want change," Maya said, stepping up. "We want protection, not silence, not threats." The reporter turned to Caleb. "Why now?" she asked. He looked at the crowd, at Lila, who stood taller than she had in days. "Because we thought we were alone," Caleb said, "and now we know we never were." Before the reporter leaves, Caleb walks back to the steps of the school, kneels, and takes a piece of white chalk from his pocket. He writes in large block letters across the concrete, "We are not in." He underlines it once, then steps back. The camera captures the moment, a still shot. Caleb standing above the words, fists at his sides, eyes steady. "Lila," to Caleb, quietly. "Every time you speak, I feel stronger, like your voice is building one in me." Caleb looked down at her, proud and calm. "Then speak, Lila, because I'm not doing this alone anymore." Brookvale High was no longer quiet. The protest hadn't ended at the school gates, it had spread. Students whispered in hallways, teachers exchanged uneasy glances, and parents called the school board, not with questions, but with demands. Something had shifted, and that shift was loud. On the following Monday, an emergency school board assembly was announced. The official line was, "to ensure transparency and address community concerns." But everyone knew what it really meant. The truth had gotten too loud to ignore, and it was about to enter the room. Caleb Morgan walked through the front entrance of Brookvale High, not as a student, but as a witness. His suspension still stood, technically, but now it didn't matter, because people were watching. Because now every step he took carried the weight of something bigger than punishment. He was dressed in a plain black button-up shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearms. His grandfather's dog tags hung from his neck. They clinked softly with every step, like a quiet metronome, counting down to confrontation. Outside the auditorium, the crowd had already gathered. Students filled the benches. Parents lined the walls. Teachers stood in uncomfortable clusters. A camera crew from the local news hovered at the back, and, somewhere in the corner, Lila sat next to Walter, holding a hand-painted sign that simply read, "Fide shown the deserves a microphone." The moment Caleb stepped inside, the room hushed. At the center of it all sat the school board. 5 members. Some older, some newer, all wearing the stiff, politically correct discomfort of people who hadn't expected to be on the wrong side of history. And beside them, sitting straight, arms crossed, jaw locked, was Chief Langston. No Garrett, just the father. Because when power gets nervous, it sends in the uniform. Principal Reynolds began with pleasantries, reading prepared statements in a voice that tried and failed to sound neutral. But everyone's eyes were on Caleb. Finally, they called his name. He stepped up to the microphone, adjusted it without a word, and pulled from his pocket a folded sheet of paper. He didn't read from it. He looked at it, then folded it again, and spoke. "I was taught to keep my head down. My mother said it was safer. My grandfather said it was survival. But what do you do when silence becomes the thing that's killing you?" A long pause. I didn't swing first. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted my sister to walk down a hallway without being afraid. He wants to minimize and to intensify. He glanced toward the board, then let his gaze drift across the crowd. This is not just about Garrett Langston. This is about every hallway you let him own. Every voice you ignored. Every bruise you explained away. Every threat you turned into a joke. He reached into his jacket and pulled out something small. A USB flash drive. I brought proof. Not rumors, not rage. Facts. Video. Audio. Statements from 17 students. You don't have to believe me. You can watch for yourselves. He placed the drive on the table in front of the board. His hand trembled slightly, but not from fear, from restraint. I'm not here for revenge, Caleb said. I'm here for the next kid, the one walking these halls after me. They shouldn't have to fight for their right to be safe. Then, with steady calm, he stepped away from the mic and walked back to his seat. The silence afterward was deafening. Then a voice cut through it. Chief Langston rose slowly. This is slander, he said. Fabricated stories from kids who want attention. You're letting emotion cloud facts. He turned to the board. My son was attacked, humiliated, and now our family's name is being dragged through the mud by a group of children who've been coached and manipulated. The room stirred, restless, uncomfortable. But then, something unexpected happened. Principal Reynolds cleared his throat. Chief Langston, we've reviewed the video. He paused. His voice lowered. We've reviewed all of it. Langston's face stiffened. And while the investigation is ongoing, Reynolds continued, the footage shows Garrett initiating physical contact repeatedly. There are patterns, documentation, and we cannot ignore them. The teacher stood in the back. I warned you about Garrett last year. A second voice. So did I. No one listened. This shift happened then. Not loudly, but visibly. The power in the room moved from my uniform to the students. And then Caleb did something no one expected. He stood again, walked to the front, picked up Lila's sign from her seat, and, without asking, placed it against the podium. Truth deserves a microphone. Then he looked straight at Langston. I don't want your badge. I want your silence to end. Langston said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. As Caleb leaves the microphone, Maya and Eric walk to the front. One by one, each student places their printed photo with the statement beneath. On the wall behind the board, they form a line of faces, a gallery of silence turned visible. By the end, there are 17 faces. 17 truths. 17 reminders. Walter to Lila whispering, your brother just did something most grown men never do. He stood up without shouting, and somehow the whole room heard him, louder than any siren. Lila smiled, faintly, tears in her eyes. That's because he didn't speak for himself, Grandpa. He spoke for all of us. The next 48 hours in Brookvale felt like a town holding its breath. It wasn't just about Caleb anymore. It wasn't even just about Garrett. It was about everything that had been swept beneath the polished floors of the school and buried beneath polite conversations at dinner tables. And now, like rot beneath paint, the truth had risen to the surface. And it stank. By the next morning, Caleb's speech and the wall of 17 student testimonies had gone viral in the county. Someone had taken a photo of the moment he placed Lila's sign, Truth Deserves a Microphone, against the podium. It had become the symbol of a town on edge. That image was printed on T-shirts, posted on lockers, shared in stories, scribbled in notebooks. Truth had found a body, and it wore the face of a quiet black teenager who dared to stand. But even a rising tide drags the debris with it. Bory Lankin didn't return to school that week. Rumor said he was suspended, pending further investigation. Others whispered he'd been sent out of town. But none of it mattered, because something far more devastating had happened. He had lost the room. His power he once wore like armor, his name, his father, his friends, had begun to dissolve. It started in the hallways. The same students who used to laugh at his jokes now avoided his name. Teachers who once looked away now paused in staff meetings. Derek and Miles, the ever-present shadows, walked farther behind now, unsure of their place. On Friday afternoon, when Garrett finally appeared again, shoulders hunched, eyes darting, he didn't walk in like a king. He crept in like a ghost, and nobody cheered. Nobody looked. Nobody cares. He passed the bulletin board where 17 faces stared back from the wall. Eric, Maya, Charlie, Lila. Others he never even remembered hurting. But they remembered. They remembered everything. And now the school did too. Gareth reached his locker, fumbling with the combination, but the silence behind him was louder than any shout. He turned. A group of freshmen were watching him. Not glaring, not mocking, just watching, as if seeing him for the first time without the shield of invincibility. One whispered, "That's him." And Garrett flinched. The boy who never flinched. He slammed his locker shut and walked away, faster this time. But the eyes followed him, like judgment wrapped in teenage silence. At the school board building across town, a press conference was called. Principal Reynolds stood at the podium, hands clasped tightly in front of him, the collar of his shirt slightly crooked. "We have reviewed all submitted evidence," he said, "and effective immediately, Garrett Langston is suspended indefinitely. Additionally, a formal investigation has been launched regarding prior complaints against school staff for failure to act on reports of harassment." A reporter called out, "And what about Chief Langston?" Reynolds hesitated. "Then, we are in communication with the mayor's office. No one is above accountability." A room buzzed. It was more than the fall of a student. It was the beginning of something larger. At home, Caleb stood at the window, watching the light change through the blinds. Lila sat cross-legged on the floor behind him, working on a new sketch. On the page was a figure walking through smoke. Not running, just walking. Shoulders squared, eyes ahead. Walter came up behind them both, his hand resting gently on Caleb's shoulder. "You said something that couldn't be unsaid," Walter murmured. "That's real power." Caleb nodded slowly. "But what now?" Walter smiled faintly. "Now? You build something in the silence you made." That weekend, students gathered on the lawn in front of the school and created a mural, a long canvas, rolled out across the grass, where each student could dip their hands in paint and press their palms to the surface. Above the color-soaked handprints, someone wrote in block letters, "We're here, we matter, we won't be silent again." Caleb and Leela pressed their hands side by side. Red and blue, truth and courage. Maya, standing before the mural, to Caleb, "You didn't tear anything down, Caleb. You just made space for the rest of us to finally stand up." Caleb smiled, eyes glinting with quiet fire. Let's keep standing." The Monday after the mural dried, Brookvale High opened its doors like any other day. But inside, everything felt new. The air wasn't heavy. It was light, brisk, like someone had cracked open a window that had been sealed for far too long. The usual static of murmured gossip had quieted. In its place was something slower, more careful, respectful. Even the bell rang differently, less like a command, more like an invitation. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. This collect changed, not because the walls looked different, but because the silence that once lived inside them was gone. Caleb Morgan stood across the street, backpack slung over one shoulder. His suspension had been officially lifted the night before. He was welcome to return to classes immediately, as the email read. So polished it was almost laughable. But he wasn't in a rush. Instead, he stood and watched the students file in, talking, nodding, bumping shoulders, normal stuff. But even in the mundane, something had shifted. They walked taller. Caleb crossed the street and stepped through the school's front doors. Not as the kid everyone ignored, not as the kid who almost got expelled, but as the kid who spoke and made the world listen. His first class was history. As he entered, the room hushed. But it wasn't awkward. It was reverent. The teacher, the quiet man named Mr. Fulton, nodded at him, the way soldiers do when they recognize one another from the same battlefield. Caleb said, opened his notebook. A folded piece of paper lay inside. Unfolded, it read, "Thank you, M.W." Small, soft, but real. That afternoon, during lunch, he sat with Eric, Maya, Charlie, and Lila at the far picnic bench. Not in the shadows, in the sun. Lila was drawing again, her latest piece, a tree cracking through concrete, its roots bursting up from below. Charlie leaned in. "You think it's really over?" Caleb shrugged. "Not over, but we changed the rules." Maya sipped her drink. "Feels like we rewrote the first chapter." Eric grinned. "Then let's make the rest legendary." They all laughed. Not loud, not forced, just the kind of laugh that comes after you've earned the right to breathe again. Then something happened. A small moment, but huge in meaning. A group of underclassmen walked by. 3 of them. One paused, turned back, and with an awkward shuffle, looked at Caleb. "You're the reason I came to school today," the girl said. "I used to think it didn't matter, that no one cared." She hesitated, eyes shimmering. "But you made me feel seen." Caleb didn't speak at first, just nodded. Then, quietly, "You are always visible. Maybe now more people are finally looking." Later that evening, Caleb walked back to the mural with Lila. The paint had dried. The words had settled. "We were here. We matter. We won't be silent again." Lila took out a small brush and added one more line beneath it. "And we'll listen to those who still are." Caleb didn't say anything. He just took her hand in his. They stood there, palms streaked in color, watching the wall speak back to the silence. Walter on. Later that night, standing in the garage. "You didn't win with your fists, Caleb. You won with your voice. And that kind of victory lasts." It began, not with applause, but with stillness. 1 week after the protest, Caleb Morgan returned to the mural alone. The paint had begun to crack under the spring sun, but the message remained. He ran his fingers across the words. "Warrior, we matter. We won't be silent again." Then looked up at the empty schoolyard, calm and quiet. No cameras, no chants, no audience, just sunlight, soft wind, and the sound of his own breath. It was not triumph that lingered. It was presence, power, quiet and enduring, not in what he had broken, but in what he had made possible. What followed was quieter, too. Reforms in the school board, conversations between parents and teachers that had never happened before. The hallway where Lila was once shoved became a place where other students now paused, looked, listened. Justice didn't roar, but it stayed. What this story teaches us isn't just about racism or bullies or broken systems. It is about the deep, unshakable truth that silence, when used to protect the powerful, is violence in disguise. And that sometimes the bravest act is not to shout louder than everyone else, but to speak when no one expects you to. Like Caleb, we all hold the power to say no more, to speak not for applause, but for the next person who walks the path behind us. Even if you're not a student, even if your fighting days feel long behind you, you still hold a voice. Maybe it's in the way you vote, maybe it's in the way you listen, maybe it's in how you tell your grandchildren, speak up. I will believe you. Because a just world is not inherited, it is built. And the first brick is always truth. If this story moved you, please consider subscribing to Racist Stories Uncovered. Share this video with someone who may need to hear it. Not for views, but for change. Let's keep these stories alive so the silence never wins again. Thank you for being here. Stay close. More truths await.